Before we start today's video, I would like to take a moment to say thanks to all my patrons. I wouldn't be able to keep doing this without you, so thank you so much for all your support. I would also like to take a moment to say thanks to Code Gorilla and Richter for their tier 3 sub this month, and special thanks to James Williams Bond for his tier 4 sub this month. In this video we are going to add a gathering skill to the player so that he can go to apple trees like this and click on them to gather the apples. It will simply just open up a loot window like this. And then when you're done looting, it will change the apple tree into a normal tree because there are no more apples on it. Just like this. So let's get started. Before we start implementing something, I would like to fix a bug. You can see here, if we click on the trees, just right click on any of them, we will get this null reference in the game manager click target. So let's try to open up and see what's actually happening in there. Because we are actually, let's here, open up Visual Studio. Right here, we're trying to take something interactable from whatever is interactable. And our trees are interactable already, but we are trying to do this before we have checked if they are interactable. The raycast is okay and everything, but I would like to do an if statement here. This is if, and then our hit.collider.gameObject, or actually not gameObject, just hit collider isn't null. So if we hit something correctly, then we do all this. There we go. So we need to make sure that we have a hit on anything inside on this layer before we start trying to take the interactable from it. Let's try one more time. If we stop our game and run it again, we shouldn't have that problem anymore. Let's see here. So now I can right click without anything. So with that done, we can start creating the actual script we need. There should be something called scripts here and something called loot. In here we have a loot table. We actually need to generate a new script that needs to inherit from loot table. And we can call it gather loot table. So this gather loot table will be used every time we need to gather something. It could be minerals like rocks and stone and what is it called, iron, gold and all those things. Or apples in our case. In general, we're just going to use that loot table to gather our stuff. So loot button, no, sorry. Where was it? It was on the loot, gather loot table there. Gather loot table needs to inherit from loot table. Like that. And because we already have some functionality inside loot table we are going to use, but we need to change a few things around here. We're going to make it interactable in a moment, but first of all, let's just try to make sure that we can spawn our apples. The first thing we need is to create a sprite renderer. The reason we need a sprite renderer is because we need to change the sprite on the tree to apples or from apples to a normal tree. So we have a sprite renderer and make it serialized so we can see it from the inspector. Then we also need a sprite, just a sprite, and call it default sprite. And this is for setting it back to the original sprite when we're done looting the tree. And then we need to make another sprite called gather sprite. And we of course also need to serialize that one. When all the fields are in place, we can start to create the row loot function. Inside the loot table we have a row loot function, but we will have to be able to override that one. So let's make it protected virtual called row loot, and then go to our gather loot table and override that. Protected override row loot, and I don't want to call the base because we need to change the functionality in it actually. It's quite a bit different. First of all, we need to take my dropped items and instantiate it like that so that it's not null. Then we need to say for each loot called L inside. It's called L inside the loot array. And you can see we can't see the loot array because it's inside the loot table, and up here it's private, so we need to make it protected so that we can see it in our inheriting classes. As you can see, we inherit from loot table. When something protected, we can take and access it like that. Then we say roll random range, and we need to roll from 0 to 100, so we have 100 different values. If my roll is less or equal to L.drop chance, so the loot is drop chance, well, then we need to put it. And we don't only need to put one item here. We can have 1 or 5 apples, for example. So we say we create an item count random.range from 1 to 6 actually, because the upper is exclusive, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 now. And then we say for loop and say, well, we want to run as many times as our item count is. And then we say my dropped items dot add new drop instantiate l dot my item comma this. There we go. So we add a new drop or new item to my dropped items list. And then we need to change the sprite renderer. So sprite renderer dot sprite equals gather sprite. So we want to indicate that we have apples on the tree. If we don't roll correctly, right here, we simply say game object that set active false. You'll see in a minute why we need to do that. Okay, so that's the gather loop table for now. I think we need to what do we need to use? Make some interaction stuff in here in a moment, but for now it's enough. Let's go out here and find our prefabs, find our environment, and find the tree. Open the prefab, and on the prefab we need to add a new empty and call it gather loop table, I guess. Yeah, nice and spelled. And then add a component called gather loop table. The sprite renderer is taken from the parent right there. The default sprite is this tree. The gather sprite is my tree with apples. If you go and re-download the assets, there will be an apple tree inside the sprite folder with the trees. There'll be apple tree as well. So you can just go and re-download that. So now these have been set. Let's see loot. What loot does it add? Well, in this case it's just a tree and it only has apples. But if you had a vein or something where you could drop coal and gold, for example, then you would you might want to add more things here. The item we want to add is an apple. So right now we don't have an apple. Let's go to our prefabs. Where is it? There. And actually I guess we can just go to our scripts actually and say items, and we have back armor and such health potion. Let's try to create a new one, create a new sharp script and call it apple, and it didn't open it up. Let's try again. There. And I think I'm just gonna go to my items and find my whatever item. Not my items, there's something that's less health potion. Health potion doesn't have a lot of things. Just copy the health potion right there and paste it. Where is it? There, in here. Rename this one to apple. Items apple. Order should be 4 or something. Apple. Here's for item. There's no use on it right now. It doesn't have this field here. And it's not unusable, I think. And it just writes something. Let's write in here. Let's just write an apple a day keeps the doctor away, like that. I guess that's what I want to do here. So if I save this, go back, go to my assets. Create items 1 0 1 2. Okay, it should be. Let's see, it should be instead of 4, it should be 3, I guess. Maybe actually 2 because 0 indexed there. Strategy if that helped. So assets, create items, armor apple there. Create an apple. There we have it. Move it from here into the items folder in my prefabs right there, and then I take my gather loot table, take my apple, move it there, select my apple, and say that the stack size is maybe 5 or 10, let's say 10. The icon is my apple. The title is apple. Quality, common. Price, we don't want to put a price right now. So now we have a loop table that has been set up, and drop chance of an apple is, let's say 10% of the trees have apples on them. And if I go back here, it should have been saved. I just want to save everything as well here. So let's see what happens if I run it. So it might look a little weird. Let's see here. We actually don't have any apple trees. Let's put up the chance maybe. Let's try one more time. Oh wait, we didn't add the script, did we? Oh, we did. Let's see here. Let's try to see here if we open the game world. Game world, my grid, trees, and I have trees here, and they have a gather loot table, and they have this on them. Okay, so did I remember to call the function? Let's see here. Gather loot table, row loot. We need to call row loot somewhere, and I forgot to do that. Where do we want to do that? We want to do it in start. So we're going to make a private void start and call it row loot, like that. Save. And one thing we need to be sure is the fact that if we go to sprites and find our trees and find the apple tree, make sure that this pixels per unit is set to the same as the trees pixels per unit, 300, and also the custom pivot needs to be the same, else the tree is going to be placed elsewhere. So 300, apply that one, and it sees 0.23 and 0.3. So custom 0.23 and 0.3, and apply that. So now they're set up the exact same way. When we play it now, they should just be placed on top of it. There we go. So we can see we have a few apple trees around here. So now we can actually spawn the trees. Now we need to be able to gather them as well, of course. We need to modify the player a little to be able to gather something. Right now we have an attack routine, but we also need a gather routine. Essentially they're going to do the same, and a lot of the code is going to be the same. But right now I'm just going to copy and paste some of it, and then later we can refactor to make sure that we don't rewrite the same code multiple times. Let's see, we have a cast spell function, but we also have a gather function. We need to create one. So let's see here, we have something called cast spell somewhere. There's cast spell. Below it we can make one called gather, and it takes in a string called skill name, and we also take in a list of drops, and these are the items that we are trying to pick up. And it's almost going to be the same as this one, or almost. It's like we can only do it if we're not attacking. So if is attacking, then we say attack routine equals start coroutine, and then we need to start our gather routine. So attack routine is not fitting anymore because we're using the same routine for multiple things. So right click on it, say rename, and call it action routine. Like so. The gather routine is almost going to be the same as the attack. So let's go here and private I enumerator. I enumerator there, and call it gather routine. And string skill name, and then we take in a list of drops as well, like that, items. Okay, so now we have created the structure of it. We can go down here again and start the coroutine. We'll simply start it by saying gather routine, and it takes in the skill name and the items that we are trying to gather here. Go and convert from drop to drops. What did I write? Drops instead of drop here. There. Okay, so that's the skeleton of the gather routine. It's almost going to be the same as our attack routine. So we can actually go here and take the whole attack routine, all the content of it, copy it, and paste it. This is what I mean by we are reusing stuff. and we need to make sure that we're not doing that like this later. So here we need to use skill name instead of spell name, and else it's almost the same. However, we don't need this current target and then line of sight stuff, so we can delete and need to remove from the gather routine. Stop attack, yield return. Attack, we're going to use the attack animation to gather something. If you have another animation, you need to switch that out here. If it's attacking true, spellbook cast, spell, skill name, that's fine. And then down here, we need to say loot window that my instance dot create pages items. There we go. So we save that, and there shouldn't be any errors now when we're trying to gather something. This one's public, so with this done, we can go back to our gather loot table, and we can make this eye interactable. Can right click on it, quick actions, and implement the interface. And then we should have a couple of functions, interact and stop interact. And now we need to implement them. Interact is fairly easy. It's just the player that my instance dot gather. We need to use the gather skills. This should be, this could also be mine or whatever you want to call it. In this case, just gather skill. I'm just showing you through how to create one. You can have multiple professions in your game. And then loot window dot my instance dot, and then we need an interactable. This is for removing. Need to remove the apples. We are done, and we can do that later. Let's just write that note there. And then down here in stop interact, we say if my dropped items that count, that is 0. If we have 0 count, then we say sprite renderer dot sprite. Oops, that one was non-capital there. Dot sprite is the default sprite. So we set the default sprite. Then we say game object dot set active false, so that we can't try to reopen it when there are no more apples. There's nothing to loot, so there's no reason for us to be able to have this gather loot table enabled in our game. And then we also say loot window my instance dot close. So this will remove the apples when we have looted all of them and we move away from the tree. However, we also need to remove them when when we loot the apples and we stay at the tree. We don't want to be able to see the apples just because we're standing close to it. Anyway, with this done, we need to do some stuff in Unity. We need to find our prefab again. It needs to interact. Give me a sec. There we go. I think we can do something now. Yeah. Then we say items, or not items. We say environment, and we say tree1 and open prefab. Select gather loot table, and we need to set the correct things here because I think we need to make sure that we have the right tags and stuff. So let's see, environment was tree1, and inside the prefab we need to make sure that this one is tagged as an interactable and a clickable. That's what it's called. So interactable and clickable. This is very important for us to be able to interact with it. Then we need to add a component. We need to add a circle collider to it, and we need to move it to the right position. And this is the area where you want to be able to loot this. So let's just make it like this or something, and then move it up. So this is where you need to be standing to be able to loot this tree here. So you can just adjust this exactly as you want. You can also use something else than a circle collider if you want to. See, I think like there. Okay. So with that done, you go back. And what else? We need to go to our spellbook. So we need to go to our UI canvas, find my spellbook. And here we need to open our spells, and we need to add a new gather skill. So make 4 and open this one up. And then we need to set the gather skill. If we don't have a gather skill, then we will not be able to gather anything. So let's call this one gather. This name here needs to reflect the name we write right there. If it doesn't, then we have a problem. And then we say damage 0 doesn't matter because it doesn't need to do damage. What icon do we need to use? Well, for this profession we just use apple because we're picking apples. Speed 0. How long time does it need to take to pick an apple? Or 3 seconds. Prefab here. You can just leave it blank. Description uses the gather skill. Remember, this is a general thing. So then we also need to make this one green. There we go. Now I have a green bar when I loot it. With that done, let's try to run it and see if it actually works. So I can go to these apples and I can right click on it. It says gather. Go. So I have 3 apples here. I can pick them all. And now you see the apples are still there because there's one thing we're missing. But if I go away, the apples disappears. Okay. So we can pick up the apples. Oh, and you can see I'm colliding with something I shouldn't be colliding with. And that's because we forgot to take the prefab 3 prefab here and make sure that this circle ladder is a trigger. So we also need to make sure that is set. So to make sure that the apples disappear right away when you pick them, we need to go to the loot window. But we have that there. Inside the loot window, we have a list of everything. We also need to make sure if it has an interactable. So let's make a property called interactable. My interactable. So if the interactable has been set, then we need to do something when we close the window. So where do we do that? We can have a close function somewhere, I guess. Open add loot, clear next, close. There it is, close. If my interactable isn't null. So if it isn't null, then we have something we're interacting with, like a tree. So we say my interactable dot stop interact. And then we say my interactable is null. The reason that this will work is because inside our gather loot table we have stop interact. We are setting the sprite renderer here based on the count we have. I guess that's it here. Then we also need to say set the interactable as here. Where do we do that? There, here on this line we need to say loot window dot my instance dot my interactable is this. And when we stop interact, we need to say this is a very important, loot window dot my instance dot my interactable is null. If we don't do this, we are going to have an infinite loop and a Stack Overflow because it keeps wanting to stop interacting. It's very important. So because we close the window here, and closing the window will call stop interact, so we will get an infinite loop here. Let's try now and see if it worked. If we can find some apples. Go. So we can go through them now. Let's try to gather these apples. So these apples should disappear. There we go. So they're already gone when I'm closing the loot window. That's how you can make a gather skill. I know this is very general. I guess you would like to add more professions to your game, but now I've shown you how to do the very basics of it and how to create a gather skill. Of course, it would be like herbalism or mining or something else instead of just gather, but I just made a general term to make it easier for you to adapt it to your game. So that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for watching my video. Please remember that InScope Studios is a community founded page, so please consider clicking the support link on the screen to see how you can support me and get something back in return.